Azeroth's Skies, Act 1, Chapter 7. We are now departing Stormwind City. Written and read by Terrorbreaker X. The days turned to weeks, and the weeks turned into a month, and Twilight's efforts to find them a way home were still for naught. She'd more than scratched the surface of what the Stormwind Library had to offer, and was beginning to come to the conclusion that if there was a way to travel across the dimensions, it wouldn't be found within the static confines of a city. Or at least this city. All of the data she had gathered pointed to the fact that Azeroth was an incredibly large world, teeming with a diverse variety of species, and friendly and not so friendly beings. As much as she would prefer the task ahead to have been easy, she suspected that the only way forward again would be to throw themselves into the unknown once more. It's weird, she thought, as she carefully shut the cover of the last of a large stack of books she'd assigned herself for the evening, and then yawned as she gazed up at the clock on the wall to confirm that the library was only 5 minutes from closing. The guard would be around soon to lock the building up. I can't think of this place as the unknown anymore, not after a month of living here. It's too familiar now. What made the thought of moving on a little easier was that their obligation to Trius was also coming to an end. His son would be returning any day now, and their work would be done. Trius had offered to put them up for a little while until they found alternative accommodation, but Twilight was reluctant to accept. Their presence must have already drained away much of the profit that the cheesemaker would have made from their work. The streets were quiet as she began the 15 or so minute walk back to the trade district, the sun long since having disappeared from the sky to be replaced by the stars shining in the darkness. The trade district would still be fairly busy, but no one lingered outside in the canals at this time for very long. I'll discuss it with the girls tomorrow, she thought. We'll figure this out together. Trius and his wife, as it happened, were out the next night at a special event, which gave the six an excellent opportunity to sit down and talk in private. The recent rising success of the cheese shop had not gone unnoticed by Stormwind's elite, apparently, and the couple had been invited to an audience with Prince Anduin Rin himself, bringing with them samples of their product. They've only given permission for the two of us to attend, he explained to a disappointed Rarity as he put on his coat to depart. Besides, it will be a long, low-key affair. You'd probably find it boring. The rest agreed, though Rarity had to bite her tongue as she found herself still compelled to beg to go along. To be there in the presence of the highest royalty in the land. And then the six were alone at last. They sat around the big dining room table and made themselves comfortable, while Pinky distributed the food that the Triuses had left them as snacks for the night, most of which consisted, unsurprisingly, of some kind of cheese or another. They uncorked a bottle of wine, too. Twilight found herself appreciating the old glass or two, though they'd all early on learned the dangers of overindulgence in the fruity liquid after Rainbow had entered a pub out of curiosity and had disappeared for half a day before staggering back into the shop, blind drunk at 3 a.m. She'd been lucky to survive the Trius matriarch's wrath after that. Alcohol hadn't been something they'd ever had back in Equestria. It was a very exotic substance brought over by the horses of Saddle Arabia. It was enjoyable, but it was an example of the dangers that they had to learn about firsthand. She took a sip, letting the liquid roll around the inside of her mouth for a moment before clearing her throat. The others fell silent to listen to her. Okay, girls, she said. You all know why we're having this meeting tonight. Yeah, Rainbow said. It's been a month. Have you found anything yet about getting home? The princess suppressed a wince at Rainbow's directness, but then it had always been a part of her character. I know that's what you're eager for me to say, Rainbow, but I'm afraid not. She watched her friend's face fall and saw similar looks of disappointment mirrored across the faces of her other friends. Except Pinkie Pie, of course, who was preoccupied hunting an errant piece of cheese on the floor. Twilight attempted to salvage the situation. I'm sorry, but that's not to say I haven't made any progress. It's clear that there's magic in this world. I've started learning some myself, and from what I've read, I'm certain that there are very powerful magical forces out there that can bend reality, and perhaps even time. Perhaps one of them will be able to help us. Applejack smiled faintly. So what you're saying is that there's still hope? Exactly. But I don't think they're going to come to us. What do you mean? I think that we're not going to get anywhere if we sit around in this city, as nice and as safe as it is to live in. She stared around at her friends, who looked back at her with uncertainty. I'm saying we need to get out into the world, no matter what risks we're going to face. There was a pause while the others thought through the idea. Applejack spoke first. If you think it's our best way forward, Sugar Cube, then I'm all for it. Honestly, I was getting a bit sick of the city anyway. And my friends in the old town were saying I should think about getting some experience in the field. Twilight nodded appreciatively, but she couldn't help but keep her gaze for a moment on the weapons belt that the former farmer had at her side. Indeed, several of her friends had started sporting such instruments of violence. She'd seen Rainbow heft around a heavy warhammer, and had even caught Fluttershy carefully putting away a crossbow, though the girl had looked incredibly afraid of the weapon as she'd done so. She hadn't said anything about it. She could tell that her friends were enjoying the time that they'd spent off training with those they'd met in the city, from Rainbow's chatting about the light with Pinkie Pie, to Applejack talking about how exciting her daily sparring had been, to Fluttershy's gushing about the animals that she'd seen that day. Only Rarity never spoke about what she did outside of the shop, but that was a mystery for another day. She now looked to Rarity, having had a feeling that the fashionista would be the most difficult to convince. Rarity bit her lip uncomfortably and sighed. You know how I feel about roughing it, Twilight, but if you are convinced that this is what we must do, then you have my support. Leastways, you won't have much to pack this time, eh? Applejack grinned, patting her on the back. Thanks, Rarity, the princess smiled. She moved her gaze around the table. Pinkie? Taking the party on the road? Pinkie raised a hand to her chin. Okie dokie. At least we can rely on Pinkie always staying the same, Twilight thought. Fluttershy? She carried on gently. What about you? The lilac-haired woman shifted in her seat. I'm not keen on the danger, but I'm not going to be left behind. I'll go with you. Maybe I'll find an animal companion of my own. Applejack pulled her into a hug from one side, and Pinkie Pie glomped her from the other. It's going to be fine, Fluttershy. We're going to look after each other, okay? Thanks, she blushed nervously. And lastly, Rainbow Dash. She threw her hands up in the air. Hey, you're the boss. If you think this is the way we get home, I'm not going to argue with that. Applejack's right. We've been cooped up in the city too long as it is, and I've always enjoyed a bit of camping. We're all agreed then, Twilight smiled broadly. Thank you, girls. Don't sweat it, Sugar Cube. I'm guessing you've already got some kind of plan of action, eh? Sort of, she admitted. I don't think we should start off by looking for anything powerful enough to get us home. Instead, it might be better to go on a smaller expedition, just to make sure we're used to what our new bodies can do, and so we can get some first-hand experience of the world outside this city. The others all nodded slowly, though she noticed a hint of impatience that remained etched into Rainbow's gaze. Still, satisfied, Twilight reached into her bag and pulled out a rolled-up piece of parchment. I made a copy of a map I found in the Stormwind library. It's of the area surrounding the city to the south and to the east. I think, if we head south... Their scheming continued into the night, and they'd only just finished and climbed into bed when the Triuses returned. The next morning, On their last planned day of work, Twilight told Elling what they intended to do. "I can't say I advise it," he said, his brow creasing as he frowned. "There's been trouble in that area recently, with the Defias in particular. But if it's what you want to do, then I won't stand in your way. You'd certainly be safer in a group of 6, at least." "Maybe we can help with the situation," Twilight said brightly. He looked thoughtful. "Maybe. Just make sure you prepare properly for it. Get enough supplies for 2 days, at least, even if you manage to make it to each stop before dark. And you've all made some friends in the city as well, haven't you? Make sure that you let them know that you're heading out." "Of course," she replied, and he nodded. "I have to say, it'll be odd not having you around for a little while, even if my son is coming back in a couple of days. You've been very good, all of you, at raising the profile of my business, I have to say." "I'm glad we could help." She turned to go, having lots to organise. "Oh, could you tell Rarity that I'd like to speak to her when you get a chance, please?" he asked. Lord Grayson Shadowbreaker examined the warhammer that Rainbow was holding out to him, an eyebrow raised in intrigue. "You're sure about this?" Rainbow nodded sadly. "I don't want to waste your time. My friends are leaving the city for a while, and I have to go with them. You'd be better off finding someone else to wield this weapon. I'll bring the armour over in an hour or so. It was a bit much to carry in one go." Grayson didn't reach out to take the hammer. Instead, he fixed her with a steely gaze. "Haven't you enjoyed your time training at the cathedral?" Rainbow looked horrified at the thought that he might have got the wrong idea. "Of course I have. Swinging at the dummies or blocking blows with a shield has been a blast. Even that meditation stuff has been quite relaxing once I got used to it. But I can't stay here. I have to leave. I can't keep training with you." The veteran paladin still didn't take the hammer, and at last Rainbow lowered it back down to her side. "But why would that stop you from being a paladin?" he asked. Now Rainbow was confused. "You said it takes years to be a paladin." "For most, yes. The most basic recruits," Grayson replied. "But I think you've already learned many of the lessons I've been trying to teach you, even if your approach is a little unorthodox, about the importance of the virtues of compassion, tenacity, respect, and about loyalty in particular," he said. "Now, what you must do is find your own way to connect these things to the light, and you will be able to wield it as a true paladin." "So what you're saying is," Rainbow tried to piece everything together from his rather rapid delivery, "that I've still got a way to go?" "A way, yes, but not a long one. And I think that this journey that you have spoken about with your friends may be the perfect way for you to find that connection with the light, in your own way. Keep the hammer and the armour. I suspect your friends will be the key to your path towards enlightenment." She turned, following his gaze over her shoulder to the sight of Pinkie Pie giving Archbishop Benedictus a big goodbye hug. "Look after them, and let them be your guides." Watching Pinkie prance around the bemused Archbishop, Rainbow decided that she did understand what her teacher meant. She reached to her rear and slipped the hammer firmly into the clasps on her back. "Thanks." "So, you've found yourself a little field work, have you?" The greying Archmage studied her carefully from across the table. "Yes, sir. I believe it's a good opportunity for me to practice the skills I've already learned and get some first-hand experience of the surrounding area. And maybe trigger some of the memories locked away inside your head, eh?" The amnesia cover story, she thought. She hated lying, but she couldn't tell the truth. "I can only hope, sir." Malin leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers together. "Miss Sparkle, I am normally loath to permit any of my mages studying at this tower to travel without the clearest of guidelines, no matter how naturally gifted they are. But you are not officially one of my pupils, even if I have been teaching you. As such, there is nothing I can do to stop you. and I admit, in your particular case, it will likely do you a great deal of good. So I can go? So long as you tell me all about what you've learned and what you got up to on your trip once you get back. It's a deal. I'll go say goodbye to Suzanne and the others right away. Good, you can... He trailed off. Ah, Emmy! Twilight turned to find a blonde-haired woman wearing a set of robes that matched the Archmage's standing right behind her. I don't believe you two have met. Emmy, this is Twilight Sparkle. She's been studying at the tower for the last month. Twilight, this is Emmy, my daughter. Twilight smiled. It's very nice to meet you, Emmy. The other woman returned the smile just as broadly, shaking her hand vigorously. Likewise. Having spent one final night in Stormwind City, they set off early the next morning, as the sun rose above the clouds and a light mist that had lingered over the city throughout the night finally dissipated. They bid their goodbyes to the Trius family and departed the city, attracting a handful of curious stares along the way. The plan was to travel south, following the road through the forest until they reached Elwyn's border. From there, they would enter the Westfall Plains, an area of arid farmland said to be the breadbasket of the whole kingdom. They would then carry on due south until they reached Sentinel Hill, a stone tower jutting into the sky that was apparently the point of Stormwind's control over the whole area. Twilight knew it wouldn't be that simple. There were bound to be distractions and diversions along the way. She expected them, perhaps even hoped for them. Every experience would give her more information about this unknown world, more things to use to their advantage as they sought to get on top of it, and ultimately get home. And, after all, how many friends did we make in Equestria as a result of chance encounters, she thought. The group had a lunch packed by Elaine, a loaf of bread, some fruit, and, of course, some cheese. They all had one or two canteens full of water as well. Though they would be passing several water sources on their way south, it never hurt to be prepared. Applejack and Rainbow had split the task of carrying the group's tent between them. Twilight had been reluctant to allow it, as the two were already carrying their weapons and armour, especially Applejack, who was wearing a chestplate greaves and carrying a metal sword and shield that she'd apparently been given. But she eventually acceded to the arrangement, as the two didn't appear to be having any trouble. Haven't had a workout like this since I was last on the farm, Applejack declared cheerfully, while, at the back of the group, Fluttershy looked drained with just her light pack and her light crossbow. Instead of going via Goldshire, the group went down the road for about 10 minutes and then turned directly south. According to the map, they would eventually meet the road again and could save a good hour by doing so, landing them at their first stopover at Westbrook Garrison well before nightfall. Civilians were apparently welcome at the garrison for one night as guests, which suited them fine. As an idea, it seemed to be working rather well, until about an hour after they set off, when something leapt out of the bushes and tried to kill them. Their only warning was the slightest of rustling, before the wolf appeared, jaws wide open. It was just enough warning for Rarity, its initial target. She stepped out of the way with the grace born of years of dancing as a pony. The wolf kept coming, changing its target in one fluid motion to Pinky, now the closest to the group, as Twilight suddenly realised what was happening, and their collective cries of shock pierced the silence of nature. But now Applejack was moving. Dropping the tent and her pack to pick up speed, she charged back into the middle of the group to protect her friends. She'd done much the same before as a pony, saving her little sister from a timberwolf by using a galloping attack. Now, she was slower, but had other advantages. Shield first, she collided with a wolf, delivering it a glancing blow to the side and parrying a return swipe from a dirty front paw with her blade. The group huddled closer behind Applejack, and the wolf's eyes narrowed, sensing it had lost all advantage from the element of surprise. To their amazement, though, it howled and kept coming. "Oh, don't hurt him," Fluttershy yelped as she saw Applejack's sword arm rise up again. Applejack grimaced, but obeyed, pushing forward with her shield again, but the wolf was too clever to fall for that twice. It darted to the side at the last moment and delivered a painful slash to her unprotected forearm. "Youch!" she cried, and now lashed out with her sword. "Get back!" She caught the wolf on the flank as it tried to hurry away, enough to graze and bruise, but not to really wound. It circled them, looking for an opportunity, as a small stream of crimson began to trail from Applejack's arm. Twilight tried to think tactically. "We need a way to slow it down, or stop it completely. Then maybe we can get away. Think, Twilight. Wait, I've got it." As the wolf rushed in again, and Applejack tensed to receive it, Twilight raised a hand and muttered a word of power. She wasn't sure it would work, but now was as good a time as any to try this new Azerothian magic in the field. The air in the woods suddenly, momentarily turned cold as her spell resolved. The wild animal suddenly found itself unable to move, its feet frozen to the ground. No matter how much it pulled and strained, it couldn't get free. Rarity noticed Twilight's outstretched hand and quickly put two and two together. "Well done, darling. You've stopped that menace in its tracks." The wolf whimpered as Rainbow advanced upon it, intent on stopping it if it was to try to attack again, but Fluttershy beat her to it. She tackled the wolf across the ground out of nowhere just as the spell ended and it was freed. The momentum of her jump carried them out of sight beyond the trees and the shrubbery. "Fluttershy!" the others cried in shock and hurried after them, fearing the worst. The sight of Fluttershy cheerfully rubbing the wolf's exposed belly as it happily howled and licked her face was not what they'd expected to see, but equally it wasn't actually a surprise. "Guess we should have seen that coming," Rainbow voiced their sudden collective thought as they let out a sigh of relief. "Sweetheart, you mustn't play in the mud like that. And you don't know where that animal has been," Rarity said disdainfully. "Oh, but he's just the best," she hummed, scratching the wolf behind its ears. "I think he wants to come with us." "Great," Rainbow grumbled. Twilight felt her breathing slow to normal, not having realised that she'd had so much adrenaline pumping around in her system during the minutes before. I guess we can be happy," she thought. "We survived our first little scrape." Weird that it was fighting alone. Every time we fought Timberwolves back on the farm, they was always in a pack, Applejack pointed out, watching the tame wolf carefully as she sheathed her sword and shield on her back. "Maybe it's something to do with the forest," Twilight pondered as she watched Fluttershy rolling around on the floor with her new companion quite happily. "Or maybe it doesn't have a pack." "I really ought to see to this," Applejack realised, examining her lacerated arm. Blood was still welling out of the wound. "Starting to feel a little bit woozy, if I'm honest." Twilight went to reach into her bag for the first aid kit she'd packed, but Pinky beat her to it. Ooh, let me. She coughed, clearing her throat dramatically, and twirled around, only to miss a root by her feet, trip over it, and fall flat on her face. Applejack chuckled. "Oh, Pinky, you're so clumsy." "Wait. Ta-da!" Applejack stared at her limb in amazement. You healed it?" "Yeppers, you're welcome," Pinky giggled, giving her friend a quick hug. Twilight watched the scene and took a very deep breath, dropping the first aid kit back into the bag. Pinkie Pie is an enigma, she thought. She is an enigma, and I must not try to solve her, for the sake of my sanity. For the sake of my sanity. Well, this has already been an eventful morning. I wonder what we'll encounter next.